So today we're continuing our series called 7 Dimensions of Human Flourishing. And we talked initially about spirituality. This is a Harvard Center for Human Flourishing in cooperation with the Barna Research Group that have come up with these 7 dimensions that are rooted in what we would consider to be biblical revelation. So spirituality, we contrasted Christian with cultural spirituality. Last week we talked about the importance of relationships. As go our relationships, so go our lives in many ways. And today we're going to talk about money. And if you are new to church, if this is your very first time being with us, and you know the stereotypes around church and money, for example, just try to have an open mind as we talk together today, because we're going to come at it from a different angle. Money and human flourishing go together. And you might wonder what we're talking about as it relates to money, because you're here to consider spirituality or life with God. And very interesting that 2,300 times in both testaments, money is referenced. More times than prayer are referenced. And in Jesus' parables, we have a considerable amount of parables that actually reference possessions or money. And very, very interesting that there would be, of the 38 parables, 16 of them, not quite 50%, say 40% or so of the parables, have to do with possessions and money. And so money and the spiritual life do go together. And I believe the Harvard Center for Human Flourishing and the Barna Research Group have uncovered something sociologically that reflects our faith, that money and faith and money and life go together. Money just is representative, right? It's a commodity. It's a tool that we use. It can also be an indicator in many ways. And so we earn it, we spend it, hopefully we save some of it, we give, sometimes we borrow it. Money is something that's very, very important that we don't talk about a lot. And it can also be deeply personal, right? We don't walk around the lobby and say, how are you doing these days? Did you get a raise this year? We don't ask those questions. We don't say, hey, is your investment portfolio growing? We don't do that. It's personal, it's private in some ways. And it represents something. When we go and we work X amount of hours and we earn X amount of dollars, it's a reflection of energy spent, right? There's intellectual capital or your physical effort that we put into a job, adding value to the world, and then we get compensated for it. So money represents effort that's made, right? And contribution that's been made. And so money really does matter. It represents something, and it is part of the spiritual life. It's part of a flourishing life. So we're going to take the next 30 minutes or so and talk about that. But before we kind of dive in, if you're able, would you stand with me? And we're going to recite our passage to ponder, which has the theme of flourishing in it from Psalm 92, beginning at verse 12. So if you are comfortable reciting off the screen with me so your neighbor can hear your voice, that would be wonderful. So let's read together. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age, and they will stay fresh and green, proclaiming, the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. The word of the Lord, you may be seated. So why does money matter so much? Well, again, as I already mentioned, Jesus speaks about it in ways that are very, very helpful and very challenging as well. And before we step into like a biblical theological foundation for today's teaching, there are some just practical, pragmatic reasons for us to consider money. Here's one: money and flourishing. It says, the studies have shown that a household income requires, and it all depends really which part of the country you live in, but between $60,000 and $75,000 of household income promotes what we would call basic happiness. That's just basic happiness. So you have, for the most part, a roof over your head, you're paying your utility bills, you can buy groceries, and I realize we're living in inflationary times. There may not be a lot left over, but you can get basic happiness, $60,000 to $75,000. Now, after that, we go to what would be called life satisfaction, and it peaks closer to $95,000 to $105,000. So really what the study is saying generally is that if you get upwards to about $105,000 of family income, life satisfaction begins to somewhat peak. Now, there is also incremental, gradual increase in life satisfaction the higher up you go. But studies show that after you get to a certain point, and that point isn't that much higher, then all of a sudden you add more zeros on the end of that, and it doesn't really move the needle when it comes to life satisfaction that much. So at the end of the day, the billionaire is probably not much happier than the millionaire, even though all of us would like to try that out and just see if that's true. So we know stories of people who make like incredible amounts of income, and there can be lots of rigorous debate about that as it relates to capitalism and social fairness, social equity, etc. And that conversation is for another day. But we do live mostly in a capitalistic structured economy where people are rewarded for education and for contribution, and then we see outliers around the arts perhaps, or around sports and athletics, and there can be all sorts of exceptions to that, and we might see that as very problematic, but that is the way our economy tends to work. So what we're most interested in today is not whether we should adopt a more fully pronounced capitalist approach to an economy, or whether we should tweak that dramatically or slightly, but really what we're looking for today is how does money contribute to a flourishing life? So ready to go? All right, let's do this. So here are, I believe I've got two foundational ideas for us to consider as we step into our teaching for this morning. Foundational scriptural passages about money. Here's the first one, and it's around this idea of healthy focus and the idea of a competing allegiance. These are the words of Jesus. He says these words to us, and we have to be careful that we don't misapply them or misinterpret them. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Rather," he says, "store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." He says, when it comes to security and permanence, he says, if you put all your eggs in the basket on this side of heaven, on earth, then he says there's an insecurity to that, right? The market goes up, the market goes down. Real estate bust, real estate boom. There are all these ups and downs. There are thieves who are breaking in and stealing, and things just deteriorate and lose value. Once you buy a car, you drive it off the lot, it begins to depreciate and lose its value. We know that there are good assets that accumulate or appreciate, and there are assets that depreciate. He's just saying here that we need to be careful to understand that investments on this side of heaven have a lifespan, and they're not always completely secure. However, contrast that with investments, treasures that can be placed on the other side. They are secure, and they will outlast life on this planet. And then he brings this very helpful word. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now, we'll pause there for 1 second. I love what Randy Alcorn says about this. He says, if your treasure is in this world only, with every passing month and year, as you move further toward the exit door of this life, you are moving further away from your treasure. So that's why it can be incredibly painful for lots of reasons to get older. If we've put all of our stake and all of our purpose in life in this world, including perhaps our investment portfolio, the older we get, the more aware we become that we're going to leave it behind. But if our treasure is somewhere else, with every passing month and quarter and year, we are moving closer toward our treasure, which is a beautiful thing to consider. One thing we can count on, and it's a wonderful thing to have it happen in our lives, is we will get older with every passing hour and day and week and month. That's what's happening to all of us. We are aging. And as we get older, we say, thanks be to God, it means I've lived a long life, right? But we are eventually going to leave this world. Every one of us are going to do so unless Jesus comes for us first. And so this idea of Jesus saying, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Treasure determines heart, or indicates heart. Now, he seems to transition, but not really. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, what you look at, what you focus on, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, if you're focusing on the wrong things, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So Jesus is saying, be very careful what you give primary attention to. If your primary pursuit is growing your portfolio at the expense of life with God and life with family and loving people and serving his purposes, he says you're going to fill yourself up with the wrong kind of light, which is really darkness, is what he says. He's not done yet. He says, now, no one can serve two masters. Very interesting. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. And then he says this, you cannot serve both God and money. He could have said a lot of other things, but he chose money as the one that is competing for our allegiance because of what money represents. So money is very, very powerful. And by the way, you're not going to hear from me today say that money is bad or wrong. And you're not going to hear me scold anyone who is wealthy. We're going to talk much more maturely about this subject matter. And but this is foundational principle or passage number 1, okay? And this is around healthy focus and competing allegiance. These are the words of Jesus. And then now we'll go to the words of Paul. Money as a gateway affection. Here's what Paul says to a young pastor who can also teach others. He says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now, for the love of money, underline that, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. He doesn't say money is a root of all kinds of evil. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And then he says, some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. 1 Timothy 6, 9-10, the word of the Lord. So Paul is cautioning us as it relates to our eagerness to become rich. We could extract that and parse that out. What does it mean to be rich? Well, it means to probably just pursue more than my neighbor has. I want to always have more than the next person. Because it could be argued that those of us who live in the 21st century in the Western world mostly are qualifying as the people who are somewhat rich, especially as we look out into developing parts of the world. The things we just assume and take for granted, even those who are under-resourced in our culture, as long as they have basic needs of shelter and food, we are all well cared for. Now, there are some in our culture, and unfortunately that population is growing, which is problematic, and we need to step up and do what we can to help as a society. That is problematic when we see unsheltered people, and there could be mental health issues and substance addiction and all sorts of dynamics, just mistreatment. We don't want to leave people behind. Even though Jesus says you will always have the poor, he still wants us to do our best to do something about it. Are you with me? Yes. Okay, very important. I think it's important as we talk about money here, as many of us would be highly privileged in this room today, right? Many of us are gainfully employed. Many of us are, we have an emergency fund. Some of us are week to week, month to month, looking for our next opportunity for sure. There's a wide representation in this church community. But many of us are not that concerned about our next meal. And so we are, in many ways, probably numbered among the rich as we think about the global community. All right, so I've got two sort of big ideas today. We'll break this down, and I'll move reasonably quickly through it, and hopefully this will help us as we think about our relationship to money. We all have a relationship with money, and some people have a relationship with money around success or status or security, whatever that might be, but we all have a relationship with money, and we want to have a healthy one. So let's start with floundering first, money, how it can lead to floundering, and we'll contrast that with flourishing. I have 3 subpoints under each one, but just 2 big ideas for today. The first principle to consider that leads to floundering is this scarcity experience. So when we lack, there are in some circles, and I guess if it's nuanced, it's not completely incorrect if it's nuanced wisely, but to think poverty and poverty as a good thing, I think is problematic. Poverty is poverty, and it creates pain for people. So scarcity is not a good thing for the most part. If some people take a vow of poverty, they know what they're getting into, but most people who are in the under-resourced, impoverished category have not taken a vow and are not pursuing it and are not knowing what they're getting into. It's more like it's happened to them. So scarcity can be problematic. Poverty is not a good thing. If we lack the resources to take good care of ourselves and the ones we love, this is problematic on so many levels. Now, the scriptures say this too, but you might be interested to hear that he says scarcity and riches or great wealth can be problematic. Listen to what the writer of Proverbs says in chapter 30. He says, "Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread." You've heard that somewhere else before, right? Give us today our daily bread. He says, I don't want to be poor and I don't want to be ultra rich or wealthy. He says, I just want my daily bread. He says, otherwise, I may have too much and disown you. I might give my allegiance, as Jesus taught, to something else and say to myself, who is the Lord? I don't need him. I don't need God. I've got enough resources stored up. Or I may become poor, and that's a problem, and then have to steal just to feed myself. And then he says, if I do that, I'll dishonor the name of my God. And so poverty is not a good thing. And riches, great riches, can also present its own problems and be a great distraction as it relates to the spiritual life. So our first thought for consideration around floundering is scarcity. It's problematic. The second one is debt. We live in a debt culture. Mortgages and credit cards are very, very common. I don't think my grandparents had a credit card. I'm in my mid-50s. My grandparents, if they were alive today, would be 100 and something, 10 years old or so. I don't think they carried a credit card. But all of us, many of us, I'm assuming, would be able to flash a few, if you don't know what I mean. We have a few plastic pieces in that wallet, or on our phone now, I guess, in our iPhone wallet. But debt can be problematic. How does debt contribute to floundering? Well, here's the one primary reason why it contributes to floundering. Debt presumes on the future, and the future hasn't happened yet. And so we take on some expenditure, we make some commitment, we sign on the line. My wife and I signed for our first mortgage back in, I don't remember when it was, 2002 or something, and we bought our first home for $218,000. And it was like, scared out of my mind signing this mortgage. And I'm thinking, who in their right mind would ever pay $250 for this house? I'm going to have to stay in this house for the rest of my life, right? $210,000 now gets you a couple of cardboard boxes down over by the, right? It's not anything. But debt is real. It presumes on the future. And thankfully, home prices have gone up. If you're a homeowner, you're not so thankful if you're trying to get into the housing market, and that's a real problem for the younger generation. And I think we should be kind and compassionate to the ones coming behind us, because they're not living in the same economy we grew up in if you're around my age. And so it is very much a different economy, and that's, again, a whole other conversation. But we presume on the future when we take on debt. We assume that our earning power will remain the same. I remember a friend of mine who's a financial advisor out west when we lived in BC. He said, Dave, always remember this. No bell goes off when you're at the peak earning years. You just never know when you've earned your maximum dollars. And he was a big believer in managing what you have now in a way that will help position you for the future, not to presume on the future. And here's another reason why. Proverbs 27 says this, or Proverbs 22, verse 7 says this. And just another shout out for the ancient text. The ancient text deals with so many relevant issues for us. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Once you sign on that line and you borrow money from a creditor, they know where you are and they will find you, right? I was talking to a new friend of mine recently who's in private equity, who's in the mortgage business, and he owns a really, really significant business in Toronto, and he was telling me about how the mortgage business operates. And he says, yeah, well, we've had to sell a few homes along the way because of foreclosures, et cetera. But this happens. Once you make a commitment, you're held accountable to that commitment. And by the way, as Christian people, when we take on debt, there can be situations when we have to, walk away from certain things because life has happened to us, and our society, our economy has built structures to help people get a fresh start and a new beginning. But generally, we should work really hard at paying back our debts. Are you with me? Right? Because somebody else loaned you that money in good faith that you would pay it back. And if it be the bank, well, the banks have all the money. Well, do you know who the banks are? The banks are the shareholders. The Canada Pension Plan, if you have CPP, you're probably a bank holder. So when we foreclose or when we, file a bankruptcy, and there's a place for that. By the way, no shame if that's happened to you. No shame. I think it's important that a healthy society make room for people who have tough experiences financially to hit the reset button and start over. And so we make allowance for that, and we write off whatever, loan loss provisions and stuff like that. We do it to help people, step back in and have a good life. But we should really, 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 really work hard at making sure that we pay our debts. It's very, very important. And so when the power of compound interest is working against you, you are now servant or slave to the lender. And when you are out of debt and you owe no man anything, it's a wonderful, liberating feeling. And so we know that sometimes in this culture, because it's a debt culture, it takes a very long time to get there. But we should try to get there and work hard at doing so and live within our means, right? The big temptation is to say, well, I can afford it, and I can afford it, and I can afford it, and I can afford it, but I can't afford all of it. So pick and choose what you can afford and make sure you leave some margin for yourself. We'll talk about that in a few moments. All right, so right now we're talking about scarcity, we're talking about debt, and the last one is this, greed. This is around this idea of how we can, not experiencing flourishing, but experience floundering. Greed is a real problem. Randy Alcorn, in his book, The Treasure Principle, as well, says, the richest person is not the one that has the most. It's the one who wants the least, because there's a contentment about them. They're able to say, this is my lot, and I'm okay with it, right? It is well with my soul. It is well with me, period. I'm okay. I don't have to go on this mission to earn, and pile up more and more and more. Greed can be very problematic. And we can have sometimes a categorical mindset around certain sins. And in the church, we have had a preoccupation over the history of sexual sins. Sexual sins are the big bad ones. While other sins like gossip and slander and pride and arrogance and other things are not that big of a deal, right? We just say, well, I'm human, or no one's perfect. But if somebody commits a sexual sin, it's like, well, did you hear what's terrible, terrible. And Paul writes and says all other sins a person commits are different. This one's against your body, so I recognize that. And Paul says that we ought to be careful. These are temples of the Holy Spirit. I'm not minimizing sexual sin, by the way, but what I want us to do is not minimize any other sin either. They're all important because they keep us from life with God. That's the reason sin's problematic is not because God's a killjoy. It's not because he says, I want to keep all the fun from the people. God is saying, I want it to go well with you. I want you to flourish. And I know things. He's the all-wise one, the all-knowing one. And he knows that if we go down this path, it leads somewhere. You can say he's got the master GPS in the sky, so to speak. He knows where all the roads lead, where all the tributaries take us. And he says, I don't want you to end up in that toxic environment, so don't go there. Stay out of that stream. That's problematic. So listen to Paul, okay? And we're going to do a series on Colossians 3 in a little while. But listen to this. This is in the same breath. He says, put to death, therefore. Well, actually, we'll go back up. I'll go from memory. In Colossians 3 earlier, in the first few verses, he says, for you died, past tense, and your life is now hidden with God in Christ. So past tense, you've died. With Jesus, our old self has been crucified. We're dead, buried, and through baptism resurrected to new life. That's the picture of the Christian life. But now he says, oh, well, there's this tension in the Christian life. Because though you are positionally dead because of what Christ did, and you are in Christ, there's still the real experience, day-to-day experience of what it means to be a human. And all of us in this room should not deny it. It's true of all of us. Okay? He says now, put to death. I thought I died. Yes, you did positionally, David, but you're still, that sinful nature wants to crawl off the altar every day, every moment, and do life his way, not God's way. So he says, what's the approach to the Christian life? Put to death. Become a master executioner of your lower nature. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Now listen to where he goes. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust. And we're all saying, yeah, Paul, tell them the way it is, those first century Christians. Evil desires, whoa, 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 and greed. And he doesn't stop there, which is idolatry. Now, if you're reading this from a Jewish worldview and you see the word idolatry, it's like red flashing lights. It is an abomination to God to create an idol and to worship it. He says when we subscribe to greed, it's like creating an idol, which is consistent with Jesus, right? Where he says you cannot serve two masters, you either love the one or hate the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And so greed is problematic. Why is it problematic? Why does it get in the way of flourishing? Why does it promote floundering? Because anytime we put the full weight of our life on something that's unable to support the full weight of our life, we are going to be let down. When you put the full weight of your life on God, who is strong enough to support us and to contain us and to hold us, we will be satisfied. And so greed and idolatry are connected because the more zeros you get, as we've already learned, does not lead to greater dimensions of satisfaction once you get to a certain point in your life. Isn't this beautiful? But we believe the cultural lie that if I could just have more, if I could just have more, then I would be happier. Now, I'm arguing, by the way, that more is not bad, and we're going to get there in just a minute. Because more can be beautiful. It's not always bad. I remember listening to a missionary in Toronto who said to a bunch of young people, he said, earn as much as you can. Go and get the best education, get the best jobs, make as much money as you can, invest it wisely, grow your portfolio, and then he says, give away as much as you can. Because money is a wonderful servant and a lousy master. This is the teaching of Jesus. All right, so we're done with floundering. I picked 3. It's not exhaustive, but those are the 3. Now let's talk about how money can lead to flourishing. This is the good news. This is the good part. All right, here's the 3, and I'll go reasonably quickly. Generosity. Generosity. When we are confident in God, when we have a confident life of faith that is characterized by trust and dependence on God's leadership in our life, it leads to flourishing. Greed directs our dependence toward the self. Generosity ultimately operates from an abundance mentality. This is what I love about generosity. The little whisper comes into our headspace or into our heart when we see something that we see a need that we could do something about it, and then this little whisper comes in that says, yeah, but you might need that. Keep that for yourself, right? You don't know what you might need one day, so don't give it away. Be very careful, be very cautious, right? Don't be foolish, David. Keep some of it. But how much do I really need to keep? That's more art than science, right? But this little whisper comes into my mind that says, I won't have enough. That God won't look after me, right? It's a scarcity mentality, not an abundance mentality. This is what I have grown to understand. God owns it all. And guess what? What he's given to me, And when I give some of it away, he can backfill, and he does. And he can entrust me with more and bless me. And I don't have the time of the day to tell you the ways that God has blessed me, both immaterially and materially. And it's just sort of like, are you crazy? Only God could do these things. And this is not, by the way, some sort of tell these stories and see if people will be moved and then they'll give more offerings. No. Trust God with the tithe, be obedient, be generous with offerings. But offerings, by the way, can be anywhere and everywhere. You'll find a young man downtown and give him some money or go buy him something, or there's some cause that you want to contribute to outside the church. Of course, we bring the first fruits to the storehouse, to the work of God through the local church. That's what we do. And offerings can sometimes be here too, if there's something we're working on together, like Christmas at King or some other initiative. But you can go and be moved upon to do something out in our secular world that just needs more resources. Christians ought to be generous people. And you know what? We are. Study after study after study says people of faith give way, way more than people who are not identifying as people of faith. So I say that to you, well done. You're givers. You give. Mostly you give. Now, there might be a few in this room that are catching up to that. That's okay. With God's grace and the prompting of the Spirit, we can all catch up to whatever it is that God wants us to do. But always remember this, love and trust are at the heart of what it means to be a person who follows God. So I learned to be a lover of God and a lover of people, and that's an ongoing work in my life, an ongoing work in your life. And I'm also learning to trust him, that whatever it is he gives me and whatever it is he prompts me to do with it, that he'll look after me as I look after the things he wants me to look after. We are the body of Christ. What does that mean? We are his hands, we are his feet. He is the head of the church. He turns us according to his good will. He makes us focus on things that are important to him. But then he says, okay, hands, go do the work. Feet, go find your place. Go do what you need to do. And sometimes the hand has to reach into the wallet, into the purse, and it has to go online and make the electronic funds transfer to the church or to some other agency or organization. And that's just an important part of who we are. So generosity, whoever is kind, Proverbs 19 says, don't just take my word for it. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Do you believe he rewards us when we give to people who have need? I believe it. And it's not always with more money, though often it can be. It's a lot of other things that come our way. When we step into the ways of God, there's a social lift, there's a spiritual lift that happens, and it goes well with us, right? This is the flourishing piece. It goes well with us. And it's not just the First Testament. Listen to the New Testament. Acts chapter 20. This is the early church. In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, this is Paul, we must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus himself. He said this, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Isn't it humbling sometimes receiving from somebody else? All right, Suzanne, you and I find it humbling on occasion, but we like to receive sometimes, but it can also be very humbling. People have done things for me along the way that have been like, wow, that was incredibly humbling. I think I can say this. Let me do this. Yeah, I will. I got a phone call from a friend who's a good man. He cares a lot about me, and he cares a lot about my family. And he said to me, I was going through a challenging season in my life, and he knew about it. And he said, I know you like U2. And do you know, did I tell you this story before? No? Okay, that's maybe new. And he said, do you want to go to Vegas with me and watch U2? I said, well, yeah, what are you thinking? He said, no, it's on me. He flew me to Vegas. He put me up in the Bellagio Hotel. He bought me and himself tickets to watch U2 at the Sphere. The Sphere is like out of this world, right? Out of this world. Like the whole thing's a video screen, 17,000 people in there, and my band, my favorite band, U2. I was like, the heavens were kind of like crashing in on the earth. It was like bordering on a worship experience, almost. That's another story too, but it was, I don't know how much I think the tickets were $1,000 each. The flight, I didn't do all, he bought the meals, and I was like, I bought him a concert t-shirt. He let me buy him a concert t-shirt. Wasn't that nice of me, or generous of me? I was like overcome. I was overwhelmed, right? I wouldn't have spent my family budget on going to do that. And you know, it's all relative, but he could have spent that money on something else. He spent it on me. And he took me there. And I will never forget the rest of my life. And there was not just a U2 concert. It was a time in my life. There was a lot of pain in my family. And he just stepped up and said, I want to refresh my brother. And refreshed me, he did. And so money can be a wonderful servant. And it can do so much good in the world. But always remember, a lousy master. All right, let's keep going. I've got two more really quick, and I'm going to be very brief. Margin mentality. If we want to flourish, we've got to have a margin mentality. It means that we don't consume everything we get. You know, when we're younger, our prefrontal cortex is not fully formed. So our brain, you know, you get your paycheck when you're 16, 17 years old, and it's like, look at all the things I can buy. Or you just spend it all. And you know, it takes till we're about 25 years old where we say, wow, I could have done different things with that money or whatever it might be, but it's okay. Our brain's not fully developed yet. We have an excuse. It's just when we're adults and we're 40s and 50s and 60s, your brain is fully developed, right? We just want to make sure that we develop a margin mentality. Don't spend it all. Now, there might be some here who say, I have to spend it all. Do you know how much I earn? This is what I earn. I have to spend it all. And it's like, yeah, I hear you. In inflationary times, it feels like more of us are spending it all. But if we can work hard at honoring God the best we can, living below our means, if possible, during these trying times, and set aside whatever the margin might be, it can grow, and it can serve as an emergency fund, and perhaps we could invest it and get it to grow and work for us. That's what we want to consider, is how we can develop some margin. Let me read a passage that has been misapplied and perhaps misunderstood, but I just want to read it here. This is a parable of Jesus, Luke chapter 12, because some people can take passages like this and shame people for living with margin and investing the difference and growing it. And I think we have to be careful with that. So here's the passage. It's in Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, which is Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out." He says, "Be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Jesus is very, very consistent. He's cautioning us here. And then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Isn't that amazing? That's a good thing. Someone's property, you know, it yielded a wonderful, abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do." He has an aha moment. "I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" This is how it will be. Okay, this is the point of the parable now. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. So, here's my point. There is nothing wrong with building barns. Jesus is not saying don't build barns. Because if that's the case, and no one in this room should have an RSP, no one should have a TFSA, no one should have an emergency fund. If we're going to take Jesus at his word, then nobody should have any savings in this room. And I don't believe that's what Jesus is teaching. Jesus is teaching someone who had a wonderful windfall. What an amazing crop. What am I going to do with all of this? He's already got barns. There's nothing wrong with having barns. He says, I'm going to tear them down and build even bigger ones. That's the point. How big of a barn do you need? I don't think I have the right to tell you how big your barn should be. I don't think you have the right to tell anybody else how big their barn should be either. I think what we need to do is listen to Jesus when he says, this is how it will be with everyone, whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. So what business do I have? This is my business. I'll say, be rich toward God. Live a life of rich relationship with God and let the Spirit guide you accordingly. And then we'll probably all be, for the most part, reasonably okay. When we start creating laws around how big the barn should be, I think that's problematic. And we start criticizing what other people are driving or how big their house is or if they have a cottage or whatever it might be. We don't play those games in the church. That's nobody else's business. Are you with me? Okay. All right, here's the last one. Contentment, and then we're going to wrap up. Last verse. Godliness with contentment is great gain. So he starts with godliness, which is consistent with Jesus again, right? Being rich toward God. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world. I have never seen a baby come into the world fully clothed and with a wallet or a purse. Right? We brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. We might put things in the box, right? Letters, very important symbols, awards, meaningful symbols. But it stays in the box, right? We can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Which brings us all the way back to Jesus again. Give us today our daily bread. And then, to my missionary friend, go make as much as you can. Don't hurt yourself, but go make as much as you can and make sure you give away a lot. And that will lead you to human flourishing. Amen? Amen.